My name is Sarah Chen, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I'd be sitting across from my older brother at our parents' anniversary dinner, watching his face drain of color as he realized the truth. For 8 years, he'd made jokes about my cute little hobby job in tech support, rolling his eyes whenever I mentioned my work, suggesting I get a real career like his in marketing. But when Mom announced that evening that the family company had been acquired by a major corporation, and that corporation's new regional director would be joining us for dessert, neither of us expected what happened next. The moment that director walked through the door and called me by name changed everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, delivered through our family group chat in my mother's characteristically formal way. Anniversary dinner this Saturday. 7 o'clock sharp, celebrating 40 years of marriage and some exciting business news. Dress appropriately. My brother Michael had immediately responded with a thumbs-up emoji and, "Can't wait to hear the news, Mom." I'd simply hearted the message and continued debugging the server migration that had been consuming my mornings for the past 3 weeks. Our parents, Helen and James Chen, had built Chen Electronics from nothing more than a small repair shop in Chinatown 38 years ago. What started as my father fixing television sets and radios in a cramped storefront had evolved into a mid-sized electronics distribution company serving the entire Pacific Northwest. They'd worked 16-hour days, saved every penny, and gradually expanded until they owned 3 warehouses and employed nearly 200 people. It was the classic immigrant success story, and they were rightfully proud of what they'd accomplished. Michael had joined the company straight out of college with his business degree, sliding into the marketing director position with the kind of confidence that came naturally to golden children. At 35, he'd spent 13 years climbing the corporate ladder within the family business, earning promotions and praise from our parents who saw him as the natural heir to their legacy. He drove a company, BMW, lived in a downtown loft that screamed, "Successful marketing executive," and never let anyone forget that he was being groomed to eventually take over Chen Electronics. Meanwhile, I'd taken what everyone considered the unconventional path. After graduating with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, I'd shocked the family by turning down their offer to join Chen Electronics. Instead, I'd taken an entry-level position at a small tech startup, working in what Michael dismissively called technical support, but what was actually systems architecture and cybersecurity consulting. The startup had been acquired twice in 8 years, and with each acquisition, my role had evolved and expanded in ways that my family never quite understood or bothered to ask about. The Saturday evening arrival at Jade Garden, our parents' favorite upscale Chinese restaurant, felt like stepping into a familiar battlefield. The private dining room they'd reserved overlooked the harbor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the last golden rays of sunset. Round tables draped in pristine white linen, red roses in crystal vases, and enough space for what appeared to be a larger gathering than just our immediate family. My parents had clearly planned something significant. Michael arrived first, naturally, looking every inch the successful executive in his tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes. He'd brought his girlfriend Jessica, a marketing coordinator from a competing firm, who laughed at all his jokes and seemed genuinely impressed by his business acumen. They were examining the wine list when I walked in wearing a simple black blazer over dark jeans and flats, my laptop bag slung over one shoulder because I'd been working until the last possible minute. "There she is," Michael announced as I approached their table, "the family's resident computer whiz." His tone carried that particular mix of affection and condescension that had characterized our relationship since childhood, still carrying that laptop around like a security blanket, I see. "Some of us have deadlines that don't stop for family dinners," I replied, settling into the chair across from him and setting my bag carefully beside me. "How's the quarterly marketing report coming along? Mom mentioned you were struggling with the analytics section." The slight tightening around his eyes told me I'd struck a nerve, but before he could respond, our parents swept into the room with the kind of energy that suggested they had news they were genuinely excited to share. Mom looked radiant in her emerald green dress, while Dad beamed with the satisfaction of a man who'd just achieved something significant. "Sorry we're late," Mom said, embracing each of us in turn. "We had some last-minute calls to handle regarding tonight's announcement." She glanced meaningfully at Dad, who nodded and pulled out her chair with the gallantry of a man still courting his wife after 4 decades. "Before we order," Dad said, settling into his own seat, "we wanted to share our news with the family first. After months of negotiations, we've reached an agreement to sell Chen Electronics to Meridian Technologies." The silence that followed was profound. Michael's wine glass paused halfway to his lips, and Jessica's polite smile froze in place. I felt my own breath catch, though for reasons entirely different from what my family might have expected. "Sell?" Michael set down his glass with careful precision. "Dad, you never mentioned you were considering selling. I thought we were building this for the next generation." "We were," Mom said gently. "But Meridian made us an offer we simply couldn't refuse. The acquisition will secure the jobs of all our employees, provide them with better benefits and advancement opportunities, and give your father and me the chance to finally take that extended trip to Taiwan we've been discussing for 20 years. Dad leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Son, this doesn't change your career trajectory. Meridian specifically wants to retain all key personnel. You'll have the same role, possibly with even more growth potential within a larger corporate structure." Michael nodded slowly, processing this information with the careful calculation I recognized from our childhood, when he was figuring out how to turn any situation to his advantage. "What about transition planning? Timeline?" "I assume I'll be involved in the integration process, given my knowledge of our client relationships and marketing strategies." "Absolutely," Dad confirmed. "In fact, Meridian is sending their new regional director to join us for dessert tonight. They wanted to meet the family and discuss the transition plans directly with key personnel." I felt a familiar flutter in my stomach, the kind that preceded moments when my two worlds were about to collide in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the past 6 months, I'd been working on what my team had codenamed the Pacific Northwest Expansion, a comprehensive acquisition and integration strategy that had involved countless late nights, cross-country flights, and negotiations with mid-sized electronics distribution companies throughout the region. Chen Electronics had been at the top of our target list from the beginning, their reputation for quality and customer service making them an ideal fit for Meridian's expansion goals. "A regional director," Michael mused, straightening his tie unconsciously. "That's quite a show of respect. Usually, these acquisition meetings are handled by lower-level integration specialists." He glanced at me with the patronizing smile I knew so well. "Maybe you'll pick up some tips about real corporate structure, Sarah. It might help you understand how business actually works at the executive level." Jessica laughed, a tinkling sound that grated against my nerves. "Oh, that's so sweet that you still try to—"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Help your little sister with career advice, Michael. It shows what a good big brother you are." Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't completely derail the family dinner, the server arrived to take our orders. We ordered family style, as was tradition, with Dad selecting dishes he knew would impress business associates, and Mom adding her favorite dim sum selections. Michael dominated the conversation during the meal, regaling Jessica and our parents with stories from his latest marketing campaigns and his insights into industry trends that would surely be valuable during the transition process. "The key thing Meridian needs to understand," he explained while serving himself a generous portion of Peking duck, "is that our success isn't just about distribution logistics. It's about relationships. I've spent 13 years building trust with our major accounts. Companies like Patterson Electronics and Northwest Components don't just buy from us because of price points. They buy because of the personal service I provide. That's exactly the kind of institutional knowledge that makes this acquisition so valuable," Dad agreed. "Michael, you've done exceptional work building those client relationships." "It's what I went to business school for," Michael said with practiced modesty. "Understanding that B2B sales is fundamentally about trust and personal connections. Something you can't really learn from technical manuals or computer programs." The pointed glance he shot in my direction wasn't lost on anyone at the table, though our parents seemed to interpret it as playful sibling rivalry rather than the systematic dismissal it actually represented. Jessica giggled appropriately, and I focused on my orange chicken while mentally reviewing the client relationship analyses I'd been preparing for the integration phase. "What about you, Sarah?" Mom asked, clearly trying to include me in the conversation. "How's your work going? Are you still doing the computer support thing?" "System architecture and cybersecurity consulting." I corrected gently, the same correction I'd been making for 8 years. "And it's going well. We just completed a major project for a client in the aerospace industry." "Consulting," Michael repeated with barely concealed amusement. "That's a nice way to say freelancing, isn't it? Do you have steady income? Or is it one of those gig economy situations where you never know what next month will bring?" The question stung because it revealed how little he knew about my actual work life, despite my attempts over the years to explain what I did. "It's a senior position with an established firm, Michael. We have long-term contracts with Fortune 500 companies." "Well, that's good," he said in the tone one might use to praise a child for finger painting. "I know it can be hard to find stability in the tech industry, especially in support roles. Have you ever considered transitioning into something more traditional? I could probably get you an entry-level position in our customer service department once the Meridian acquisition goes through." The offer was so thoroughly insulting that I almost laughed. Instead, I took a careful sip of tea and reminded myself that in approximately 45 minutes, this conversation was going to take a very different turn. "That's thoughtful of you," I said diplomatically, "but I'm quite satisfied with my current career path." "Sarah's always been independent," Mom said, with the fond exasperation of a mother who'd never quite understood her daughter's choices. Even as a child, she preferred working on puzzles alone rather than asking for help. "There's nothing wrong with independence," Dad added, "but sometimes it's important to recognize when you might benefit from guidance from people who've already achieved success in the business world." Michael nodded sagely, warming to his favorite theme. "Exactly. And Sarah, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but there's a difference between having technical skills and understanding how business really operates. Tonight, when you meet this Meridian Regional Director, pay attention to how they present themselves, how they communicate, how they handle executive-level interactions. It might give you some insights into what real leadership looks like." Jessica touched his arm admiringly. "You're such a good mentor." Not everyone would take the time to help family members understand corporate dynamics. The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with the butter knife beside my plate. For months, I'd been the one analyzing Chen Electronics, corporate dynamics, studying their supply chain inefficiencies, mapping their client relationships, and developing strategies to integrate their operations into Meridian's larger framework. I'd sat in boardroom meetings discussing the acquisition timeline, attended video conferences with teams in Seattle and Portland, and written reports that would determine the career trajectories of everyone currently sitting around this table. "I'll definitely pay attention," I assured Michael, checking my phone as it buzzed with a text message. My assistant confirming that the car service was on schedule and that the integration team leads were ready for Monday morning's kickoff meetings. "Good," Michael said, settling back in his chair with the satisfaction of a man who'd just dispensed valuable wisdom. "This could be a real learning opportunity for you. Maybe you'll finally understand why I've been encouraging you to think bigger than technical support." As if summoned by cosmic timing, the server appeared at our table. "Excuse me, Mr. and Mrs. Chen? The Meridian Technologies representative has arrived and is ready to join you for dessert whenever you're ready." "Perfect timing," Dad said, standing and straightening his jacket. "Please send them over." Michael immediately began finger-combing his hair and adjusting his tie, while Jessica checked her lipstick in her phone's camera. Mom smoothed her dress, and Dad shifted into his formal business mode, the transformation I'd watched countless times over the years when important clients or partners were about to join family gatherings. "Remember," Michael whispered to me, leaning across the table, "this is how real business gets done. Watch how they carry themselves, how they command the room. This person didn't get to regional director level by fixing computers." I nodded solemnly, my heart rate picking up as familiar footsteps approached from the restaurant's main dining area. "I'm sure I'll learn a lot," I agreed. The server returned, leading a figure in a navy blue power suit, whose confident stride and professional bearing immediately commanded attention. My breath caught as I recognized Director Patricia Wong, Meridian's VP of Strategic Acquisitions, whom I'd worked closely with for the past 3 months on the Pacific Northwest expansion strategy. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen," Patricia said warmly, extending her hand to my father. "Patricia Wong, Meridian Technologies. Thank you so much for agreeing to this dinner meeting. I know family time is precious." "Our pleasure entirely," Dad replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Please, join us. I'd like you to meet our son Michael, who's been instrumental in our marketing operations, and his girlfriend Jessica." Michael stood immediately, practically radiating professional charm as he shook Patricia's hand. "Ms. Wong, it's an honor to meet you. I'm looking forward to working with Meridian and contributing to the integration process." "Excellent," Patricia replied politely. "And you must be Sarah," she continued, turning toward me with a smile that seemed perfectly natural to everyone else at the table but carried layers of meaning that only we understood. "Hello, Patricia," I said, standing to embrace her briefly in the kind of professional greeting that might seem appropriate between a regional director and a family member they just met. "It's wonderful to see you again." The word again hung in the air for just a moment before Patricia smoothly continued. "Sarah and I have actually met before, briefly, during some preliminary research Meridian conducted on the local business community. She made quite an impression during our conversation about the technology sector in the Pacific Northwest. It was a diplomatic explanation that would satisfy my family's curiosity while laying the groundwork for what was about to unfold." Michael's expression showed pleased surprise that his little sister had somehow crossed paths with such an important executive, though he clearly assumed it had been a brief, inconsequential encounter. "Small world," he said, settling back into his chair. "Though I suppose in Sarah's line of work she probably meets lots of different people in the tech industry." "She certainly does," Patricia agreed, accepting the chair Dad had pulled out for her and settling in with the composed confidence I'd come to associate with her leadership style. "In fact, that's partially why I suggested we combine this family dinner with our business meeting. Sarah's insights into the local technology landscape have been invaluable during our acquisition planning." Mom beamed with maternal pride. "How wonderful that Sarah's expertise was helpful to your research. She's always been so good with computers." "Much more than just computers," Patricia said, accepting a cup of tea from the server. "But we'll get to that in a moment. First, I wanted to discuss the acquisition timeline with you, Michael, since you'll be integral to the client relationship transition." For the next 20 minutes, Patricia outlined Meridian's integration strategy with the kind of detailed precision that made it clear she'd personally overseen every aspect of the planning process. She discussed client retention strategies, employee transition protocols, and performance metrics with an expertise that had Michael nodding along enthusiastically, clearly impressed by her command of the subject matter. "This level of preparation is exactly what I hoped to see," he told her, leaning forward earnestly. "I have to say, Meridian's reputation for smooth acquisitions is well-deserved, if this is the standard of executive oversight you provide." "Well," Patricia said, glancing at me with barely concealed amusement, "I can't take all the credit for the preparation. This acquisition has been managed by one of our most capable project leads from the very beginning." "Really?" Michael's interest was immediately piqued. "I'd love to meet them. Understanding their methodology could be valuable for future collaboration." "Actually," Patricia said, setting down her teacup with deliberate precision, "I think you already know them quite well." The silence that followed was pregnant with anticipation. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as Patricia's gaze moved meaningfully from Michael to me and back again. "Sarah," Patricia said clearly, "would you like to brief your family on the Chen Electronics acquisition project?" The words hit the table like a small explosion. Michael's confident smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. Jessica's perfectly applied lipstick couldn't hide the way her mouth fell open. Mom and Dad exchanged glances of complete confusion. "I'm sorry," Michael said carefully, as if he'd misheard something fundamental. "Could you repeat that?" "The Chen Electronics acquisition," I said quietly, opening my laptop bag and retrieving the leather portfolio I'd been carrying all evening. I've been the lead project manager for the past 6 months. Patricia nodded approvingly. Sarah spearheaded the entire Pacific Northwest expansion strategy. She identified Chen Electronics as our primary acquisition target, conducted the initial financial analysis, managed the due diligence process, and negotiated the preliminary terms that brought us to today's signing. Michael stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. But you work in tech support. I work in strategic acquisitions for Meridian Technologies. I corrected, the words feeling strange to say aloud to my family for the first time. I have for the past 4 years. Before that, I was a senior consultant with Hamilton Strategic, which Meridian acquired in 2019. I've been promoted twice since the acquisition. The information seemed to bounce off Michael without penetrating. He turned back to Patricia as if seeking confirmation that this was all some kind of elaborate joke. I'm confused, he said, his voice strained. Sarah fixes computers for small businesses. She's never mentioned working for Meridian Technologies. I've mentioned it several times, I said gently. You usually change the subject to talk about your own work, or suggest that I consider getting a real job in business. Mom was staring at me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Honey, when you said you worked in consulting, we thought you meant freelance technical support. No, Mom. I meant strategic business consulting for Fortune 500 companies. I opened my portfolio and removed a business card, sliding it across the table to Dad. I'm currently Director of Regional Strategic Acquisitions for the Pacific Northwest Division. Dad examined the card with the same intensity he'd once used to analyze circuit boards. Director, he read aloud. Meridian Technologies. He looked up at me with dawning comprehension. Sarah, this is a senior executive position. Yes, it is, Patricia confirmed. Sarah reports directly to me, and I report to the VP of Strategic Development. She's one of our youngest directors, but her track record of successful acquisitions is exceptional. Michael finally found his voice, though it came out higher than usual. How is this possible? You never went to business school, you studied computer science. Computer science and electrical engineering, I corrected. Double major with a minor in economics. And I did go to business school, Michael. I completed my MBA at Northwestern 3 years ago. Executive program, weekends and evenings. I mentioned it several times, but you said night school wasn't real business education. The color had completely drained from his face. Jessica was looking between us as if watching a tennis match played in a language she didn't understand. But your car, Michael said weakly. You drive that old Honda. I prefer reliable transportation that doesn't attract attention, I said. Though I also have a Tesla for longer trips and a company vehicle when I'm traveling on business. Patricia smiled at this. Sarah's one of our most discreet executives. She prefers to let her work speak for itself rather than making displays of success. Work, Dad repeated slowly. What exactly has your work involved with our company? I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward the table, displaying the comprehensive acquisition analysis I'd been refining for months. Charts, graphs, financial projections, and integration timelines filled the screen in neat, professional layouts. I've been studying Chen Electronics since January, I explained, clicking through slides that showed their revenue patterns, client demographics, operational efficiency metrics, and growth potential analyses. We identified you as the ideal acquisition target in the Pacific Northwest because of your excellent reputation for customer service, your established supply chain relationships, and your potential for geographic expansion. Michael stared at the screen as if it contained hieroglyphics. You've been studying our company? Studying, analyzing, planning the integration strategy, and developing the acquisition proposal that resulted in today's agreement, Patricia clarified. Sarah's preliminary report was what convinced our board to approve the $42 million purchase price. The number hit the table like a physical force. Mom gasped audibly and Dad's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. $42 million, Michael repeated numbly. Sarah's analysis showed that Chen Electronics was undervalued in the current market. Patricia continued. Her projections indicate we should see 15% revenue growth within the first year post-acquisition, with 25% growth by year 3. The board approved the purchase based entirely on her strategic recommendations. Quote, I advanced to the next slide, which outlined the personnel retention strategy I'd developed. We're committed to keeping all current employees, with potential for advancement within Meridian's larger corporate structure. Key personnel will receive retention bonuses and expanded responsibilities. Key personnel, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I confirmed, highlighting a section of the organizational chart. Dad will transition to Director Emeritus with full benefits and a consulting contract if he chooses. Mom will have the same option. You'll retain your current role as Marketing Director, with the possibility of promotion to Regional Marketing Manager if performance metrics support it. The conditional nature of his position hung in the air. For the first time in his professional life, Michael's career advancement wasn't guaranteed based on family relationships. Performance metrics, he repeated. Patricia nodded. All personnel decisions at Meridian are merit-based. Family connections won't negatively impact anyone's position, but they also won't provide automatic advancement opportunities. Jessica finally spoke, her voice small and confused. So Sarah is basically your new boss? The question was directed at Michael, but Patricia answered. Sarah will be overseeing the integration process, yes. She'll also be responsible for quarterly performance reviews for all retained personnel during the transition period. Michael's face had progressed from pale to slightly gray. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, which in many ways, he was. This is impossible, he said finally. You can't just be some high-level executive. I would have known. The family would have known. You would have known if you'd ever asked, I said quietly. But every time I tried to explain what I was working on, you interrupted to tell me about your own projects, or to suggest that I should consider getting a real job. Mom was shaking her head slowly. But honey, you never said you worked for such a big company. You never mentioned business trips or important meetings. I mention them constantly, Mom. Last month when I missed Cousin Linda's wedding because I had to fly to Seattle for acquisition negotiations, 3 months ago when I couldn't make Dad's birthday dinner because I was in Portland meeting with integration teams? You told me I needed to get better at time management and stop letting my job control my schedule. The memories came flooding back, each one a small revelation of how completely they'd misunderstood my life. Dad's expression showed the painful recognition of conversations where he'd advised me to be more professional, more strategic, more business-minded, while I'd been sitting across from him having spent my day in boardrooms, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. The business trips, Dad said slowly. We thought you were going to tech conferences or training seminars. Some were conferences? I agreed. Strategic acquisition conferences, mergers and acquisitions symposiums, leadership development programs, but most were client meetings, due diligence sessions, and integration planning. Patricia checked her phone and stood gracefully. I apologize, but I have another meeting this evening. Sarah, I'll let you finish briefing your family on the transition timeline. We'll reconvene Monday morning for the integration kickoff. Integration kickoff? Michael asked weakly. Sarah will be leading the 90-day integration process, Patricia explained, shaking hands with each family member in turn. She'll be working closely with all retained personnel to ensure a smooth transition. As Patricia gathered her things, she paused beside my chair. Excellent work on this acquisition, Director Chen. The board is very pleased with your strategic analysis. Thank you, Patricia. I'll send you the updated timeline Sunday evening. After Patricia left, the silence around our table was profound. The restaurant hummed with conversation from other diners, but our little corner felt suspended in a bubble of shock and reevaluation. Finally, Michael spoke. Director Chen, he said, testing the words, you outrank me. Technically, yes, I said, closing my laptop and returning it to my bag. But that's not how I think about it. We're family, Michael. That comes first. Family, he repeated, staring down at his untouched dessert. For 8 years, I've been telling you to get a real job. For 8 years, I've had a real job, I corrected gently. I just couldn't convince you to listen long enough to understand what it was. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Sweetheart, I owe you an apology. We all do. We should have paid better attention, asked better questions. We should have respected you enough to believe you knew what you were doing with your own life, Dad added, his voice heavy with regret. Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had been revealed. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a mixture of embarrassment, respect, and something that might have been pride. So, he said carefully, what happens now? I smiled at him, the first genuine smile I'd shared with my brother in years. Now we've finished dessert, and Monday morning we start working together as colleagues instead of just siblings. Colleagues, he said, testing the word. With you as my boss. With me as your integration partner, I corrected. And maybe, if we're both lucky, with you finally understanding that I never needed your career advice. I just needed my big brother to believe in me. The tears in his eyes suggested that particular lesson had finally found its mark. Outside the restaurant windows, the harbor lights twinkled like possibilities. And for the first time in 8 years, our family dinner conversation turned to questions about my work that came from genuine curiosity rather than condescending concern. It was a small beginning, but it felt like enough. The weekend that followed our dinner revelation passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Saturday morning, I woke up in my downtown condo to 17 missed calls from Michael and a series of increasingly frantic text messages that ranged from, "We need to talk," to, "I can't believe this is real," to, "How long have you been planning this?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I made coffee using the expensive espresso machine I'd bought myself for my promotion to director, sat on my balcony overlooking the city skyline, and tried to process the seismic shift that had occurred in my family dynamics. For 8 years, I'd been the little sister who needed guidance and career advice. As of last night, I was the executive who would be determining my brother's professional future. The irony wasn't lost on me that Michael's first instinct was to demand explanations and assert his right to information, the same pattern that had characterized our relationship since childhood. Even faced with evidence that completely contradicted his assumptions about my life, his initial response was to position himself as the one owed answers, rather than the one who should be offering apologies. My phone buzzed with another call from him. This time I answered. "Sarah? Thank God." His voice came through strained and unfamiliar. "We need to meet. Today. There are things I need to understand." "Good morning to you too, Michael," I said calmly, watching joggers navigate the waterfront path 20 stories below. "What specifically do you need to understand?" "Everything," he said, the word exploding out of him. "How this happened. How long you've been lying to us. What this means for the family. What this means for my job. Everything." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "I haven't been lying to anyone, Michael. I've been living my life while you've been making assumptions about it." "That's not fair," he protested. "You deliberately let us believe you were working some entry-level tech support job." "No," I corrected, my voice remaining level despite the flash of anger I felt. "You decided I was working an entry-level tech support job, and refused to listen when I tried to correct your assumptions. There is a significant difference." The silence on his end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke again, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since we were children. "Will you meet me for coffee, please? I know I don't deserve it, but I need to understand how I got this so wrong." Something in his tone, the genuine vulnerability beneath the confusion, made me relent. "Starbucks on Pine Street. 1 hour. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time in years he sounded like my brother instead of my self-appointed career counselor. An hour later, I found Michael already seated at a corner table, 2 large coffees cooling in front of him. He looked like he'd slept badly, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his weekend casual clothes rumpled in a way that suggested he'd thrown them on without his usual attention to detail. He stood when he saw me, an awkward gesture that felt formal and unfamiliar between siblings. "I got you a vanilla latte," he said, gesturing to one of the cups. "I know it's your favorite." I paused in the act of sitting down. Actually, I switched to black coffee about 3 years ago. The vanilla lattes were a college thing. His face fell. I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know, Michael, I said gently, accepting the latte anyway. But we can start fixing that now if you want to. He sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from childhood when he was trying to solve problems that seemed too big for him. I keep thinking about last night, replaying conversations we've had over the years, and I'm realizing that I never actually listened to you. Not really. No, I agreed. You didn't. When you tried to tell me about your promotions, I thought you were talking about getting moved from level 1 tech support to level 2 tech support. I was talking about being promoted from senior consultant to associate director, and then from associate director to director. He winced. When you mentioned traveling for work, I thought you were going to training seminars in other cities. I was negotiating multi-million-dollar acquisitions in other cities. When you said you were working late nights and weekends, I thought you were struggling to keep up with basic job requirements. I was completing my MBA while managing a full caseload of strategic projects. Each correction hit him visibly, his shoulders sagging a little more with each revelation of how completely he'd misunderstood my life. I found myself feeling sorry for him, watching his carefully constructed image of himself as the successful big brother crumble in real time. Why didn't you correct me? He asked finally. Why didn't you just tell me outright that I was wrong? I considered the question seriously, because it was fair. Why had I allowed him to persist in his misconceptions for so long? At first I tried, I said honestly, but every time I attempted to explain what I was really doing, you would interrupt with advice about how I should be more ambitious, more strategic, more business-minded. It became easier to just let you talk and change the subject. But you could have insisted. You could have made me listen. Michael, I said softly, I shouldn't have had to fight for my own brother's respect. The fact that I was successful should have been something you wanted to celebrate, not something I had to prove to you against your resistance. He stared down at his coffee for a long moment. I thought I was helping you. I thought I was being a good big brother by trying to guide you toward better opportunities. You were being a condescending big brother by assuming I needed your guidance toward opportunities I'd already surpassed. The words stung. I could see it in his face. But they were true, and he needed to hear them. Tell me about your job, he said quietly. Really tell me. Help me understand what I missed. So I did. I told him about Hamilton Strategic, the boutique consulting firm I'd joined straight out of graduate school that specialized in merger and acquisition analysis for mid-sized companies. I explained how I'd started as a junior analyst, working 16-hour days to prove myself in a field dominated by MBA graduates from prestigious programs, learning to speak the language of private equity and corporate development. I described the Meridian acquisition of Hamilton Strategic, how what could have been a career disaster had instead become an opportunity when Meridian's executives recognized the value of our specialized expertise. I walked him through my progression from analyst to senior consultant to associate director, each promotion earned through successful projects that had generated millions in value for our clients. The Chen Electronics acquisition isn't my first, I explained. It's my 7th. The smallest was a $12 million restaurant chain acquisition in Oregon. The largest was a $85 million manufacturing company purchase in California. Michael's eyes widened. $85 million? The client wanted to expand their aerospace component manufacturing capabilities. We identified 3 target companies, conducted full financial and operational analysis on each, and recommended the acquisition that would provide the best strategic fit and growth potential. And you managed that entire process? I led a team of 6 analysts and coordinated with legal, financial, and operational specialists, but yes, I was the primary project manager. He shook his head slowly. I had no idea that kind of work even existed. Most people don't, I admitted. It's not the kind of job that gets profiled in career guidance counseling. But it's fascinating work, combining financial analysis, strategic planning, operational assessment, and negotiation skills. Is that why you chose it? Because it was challenging? I considered the question. Partly, but mostly because I'm good at it. I have a talent for seeing patterns in financial data, for understanding how different business systems interact, for identifying opportunities that others miss. Like identifying that our family company was a good acquisition target. Exactly. Chen Electronics has excellent customer retention rates, efficient operations, and growth potential that hasn't been fully realized. You're positioned perfectly for geographic expansion, but you lack the capital and infrastructure to execute it independently. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing this information. So when you were sitting at family dinners, listening to Dad talk about business challenges, you were mentally analyzing our company's strategic position? Sometimes, I admitted. It's hard to turn off that kind of thinking when it's what you do professionally. And when I was giving you advice about understanding business fundamentals, you were already operating at a level where you understood business fundamentals better than I do. The admission seemed to pain him, but he said it anyway. You're good at what you do, Michael, I said honestly. Your client relationships are genuinely strong, and your marketing strategies have been effective. But yes, I operate at a different level of strategic analysis. A higher level. A different level, I corrected, though we both understood the distinction was semantic. He took a long sip of his coffee, then looked at me with something that might have been curiosity. What's it like, having that kind of responsibility? Making decisions that affect so many people's livelihoods? It was the first question he'd ever asked about my work that came from genuine interest rather than condescending concern, and I found myself wanting to give him a real answer. Terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, I said honestly. When I'm analyzing a potential acquisition, I'm not just looking at numbers on spreadsheets. I'm looking at 200 employees who depend on their jobs to support their families. I'm looking at customers who rely on consistent service, suppliers who need reliable partners, communities that benefit from local businesses. That's a lot of pressure. It is, but it's also incredibly satisfying when you can structure a deal that benefits everyone involved. The Chen Electronics acquisition isn't just good for Meridian's expansion goals. It's good for your employees, who will have better benefits and advancement opportunities. It's good for your customers, who will have access to expanded product lines and services. It's good for Mom and Dad, who will finally have the financial security to retire comfortably. Michael nodded slowly. And it's good for me, assuming I can adapt to working in a larger corporate structure. You'll adapt, I said, with confidence I genuinely felt. You're smart, you work hard, and you understand the client relationships better than anyone. The question is whether you can adapt to working with me as a colleague rather than as your little sister who needs career guidance. That's what I'm most worried about, he admitted. I don't know how to relate to you as an equal, Sarah. I've spent 13 years thinking of myself as the successful one, and you as the one who needed help. Then start by thinking of me as someone who might occasionally be able to help you, instead of someone who always needs your help. The concept seemed to genuinely puzzle him. Help me how? Well, I said, pulling out my phone and opening a document. For starters, I've been reviewing the marketing analytics for Chen Electronics, and I think there are some opportunities you haven't fully explored. His interest was immediately piqued. What kind of opportunities? I turned my phone toward him, showing him a graph I'd created analyzing customer acquisition costs across different marketing channels. Your digital marketing spend is heavily weighted toward traditional online advertising, but your customer demographics suggest you might see better ROI from targeted social media campaigns and industry-specific content marketing. He studied the graph intently. We tried social media marketing 2 years ago, but the engagement rates were terrible. Because you were using generic business-to-business social media strategies instead of industry-specific approaches, I explained, swiping to show him comparative analysis from similar companies. Electronics distribution has very particular customer behavior patterns. Your potential clients aren't scrolling through LinkedIn looking for generic business content. They're participating in specialized forums, reading industry publications, and attending technical conferences. So instead of broad social media presence, we should focus on industry-specific digital engagement. Exactly. And I've identified 3 industry publications and 2 technical forums where Chen Electronics could establish thought leadership through targeted content marketing. The initial investment would be minimal, but the potential for customer acquisition is significant. Michael was leaning forward now, genuinely engaged with the analysis. This is incredibly detailed. How long did it take you to develop this strategy? About 6 hours spread across 2 weeks, I said, closing the document. It's part of the integration planning process. I analyze the target company's current marketing strategies and identify optimization opportunities. 6 hours, he repeated. It would have taken me weeks to pull together this kind of competitive analysis. You would have reached similar conclusions, I assured him. You understand the industry and the customers. I just have access to broader analytical tools and comparative data from other acquisitions. Tools and data that could make me better at my job. Tools and data that could make Chen Electronics more profitable, which benefits everyone. He sat back in his chair, a strange expression crossing his face. You're going to make me better at my job, aren't you? I'm going to provide resources and analysis that support your existing strengths, I said diplomatically. That's not what I asked. I met his eyes directly. Yes, Michael, working with me will probably make you better at your job. My little sister is going to teach me how to do my job better. Your sister, who happens to have specialized expertise in strategic analysis, is going to share resources that complement your existing marketing expertise. He started laughing, a sound that began as bitter irony but gradually shifted towards something that might have been relief. This is so much worse than I thought it was going to be. Why worse? Because it means I was wrong about everything. Not just wrong about your job, wrong about your capabilities, wrong about your success. I was wrong about you as a person. The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way that was unfamiliar for our relationship. You weren't wrong about everything, I said gently. You were wrong about my professional life, but you weren't wrong about me being stubborn and independent and preferring to figure things out on my own. I was wrong about thinking those were weaknesses instead of strengths. Maybe they're both, I suggested. Maybe being stubborn made me persist when other people would have given up, but maybe it also made me stop trying to convince you to see me differently. Do you think we can fix this? He asked, his voice uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since we were children. Do you think we can figure out how to be siblings and colleagues at the same time? I think we can try, I said honestly, but it's going to require both of us behaving differently than we have for the past 8 years. What do you need from me? The question surprised me with its directness. I need you to stop assuming you know what's best for my career and start asking questions about what I'm actually doing with my career. And I need you to trust that I'm competent at my job, even when you don't fully understand what my job involves. What else? I need you to accept that sometimes I might know things that could be helpful to you, instead of automatically assuming that any advice flows from older brother to younger sister. He nodded slowly. Those are reasonable requests. What can I do to start demonstrating that I'm taking them seriously? I considered the question carefully. Monday morning, when we have our first integration team meeting, I need you to participate as a colleague who has valuable insights to contribute, not as my brother who's worried about family dynamics affecting business decisions. Can you separate those things? The family dynamics and the business decisions? I've been separating them for months, I pointed out. I managed to conduct a thorough and fair analysis of Chen Electronics' acquisition value without letting personal relationships influence my professional judgment. But this is different. Now I'll be working directly with you, taking direction from you. Taking direction from Director Chen of Meridian Technologies, I corrected, who happens to also be your sister Sarah. Is that how you see it? As 2 separate roles? I thought about it. Not exactly separate, but definitely distinct. When I'm analyzing financial data or developing integration strategies, I'm thinking like Director Chen. When I'm making sure the acquisition terms protect your job security and advancement opportunities, I'm thinking like your sister Sarah. You did that? Made sure the acquisition terms protected my position? I made sure the acquisition terms were fair to all retained personnel, I said carefully. But yes, I made sure that your role was preserved and that you'd have opportunities for advancement based on merit. Even though I've spent years treating you like you didn't understand business, especially because you've spent years treating me like I didn't understand business, I wanted to prove that I understood it well enough to take care of my family. Michael was quiet for a long time, staring out the coffee shop window at the busy street beyond. When he finally spoke, His voice was thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology, Sarah. Not just for last night, for years of dismissing you and condescending to you and assuming I knew better than you did about your own life." "You do owe me an apology." I agreed. "But I also owe you some honesty. I could have tried harder to make you understand what I was really doing. I could have been more direct about correcting your assumptions." "Why weren't you?" "Because it hurt," I admitted. "Every time you dismissed my work or suggested I needed to be more ambitious, it felt like you were dismissing me as a person. It was easier to just avoid the subject than to keep fighting for your respect." "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I never meant to make you feel dismissed." "I know you didn't. You thought you were being helpful. But I wasn't helping. I was hurting you." "Yes," I said simply, "you were." We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of years of miscommunication and missed opportunities for real connection. "What happens now?" Michael asked finally. "How do we move forward from here?" "Now we learn how to work together," I said. "And maybe, if we're both willing to put in the effort, we learn how to be real friends instead of just siblings who tolerate each other at family gatherings." "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like to know who you really are, instead of who I assumed you were." "Then ask me questions," I suggested. "Real questions about my life, my work, my goals. And listen to the answers instead of waiting for your turn to talk." "Can I start now?" "Sure." He took a deep breath. "What's the most challenging part of your job?" It was such a simple question, but it was the first time he'd ever asked it. "The most challenging part is balancing the financial optimization that's best for the acquiring company with the human impact on the employees and communities affected by the acquisition." I said, "Every deal involves real people whose lives will change, and I feel responsible for making sure those changes are as positive as possible." "That sounds incredibly stressful." "It is, but it's also what makes the work meaningful. When I can structure a deal that makes everyone better off, when I can save jobs while improving operational efficiency, when I can help good companies become great companies, it feels like I'm making a real difference." "Is that why you chose Chen Electronics? Because you thought you could make us a great company?" "I chose Chen Electronics because you already are a great company," I corrected. "You have everything necessary for sustained growth. Excellent customer relationships, efficient operations, quality products, and dedicated employees. You just need capital and infrastructure to reach your full potential. And you can provide that through the Meridian acquisition. We can provide that together." The word, together, seemed to resonate with him. For the first time since I'd known him as an adult, Michael looked at me like he was seeing a partner rather than a problem to be solved. "I want to be a good colleague," he said earnestly. "I want to contribute to making this acquisition successful. Then bring your expertise and your insights, and be open to learning new approaches when they could be helpful. And you'll be patient with me while I figure out how to work with my little sister who's also my boss? I'll be patient with you while you figure out how to work with your colleague, who also happens to be your little sister." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since Friday night's dinner. "That's going to take some getting used to." "For both of us," I agreed. As we left the coffee shop, Michael walked beside me instead of slightly ahead, a small change that felt symbolically significant. At the corner where we would part ways to head to our respective cars, he paused. "Sarah, can I ask you one more question?" "Of course. Are you happy with your career, your life, the choices you've made?" It was perhaps the most personal question he'd ever asked me, and I took a moment to consider my answer carefully. "Yes," I said honestly. "I'm happy with the work I do, proud of what I've accomplished, and excited about the challenges ahead. I'm happy with who I've become, even if it took a long time for my family to see her." "I see her now," he said quietly, "and I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now." "Thank you," I said and meant it. "That matters to me more than you probably realize." "Can I hug you?" The question was so unexpected, so unlike our usual formal goodbyes, that I almost laughed. Instead, I stepped forward and let my brother embrace me properly for the first time in years. It felt like forgiveness and new beginnings, and the possibility that we might actually become the kind of siblings who liked each other. "See you Monday morning, colleague," he said as we separated. "See you Monday morning, Michael." As I drove home through the busy Saturday afternoon traffic, I found myself thinking about the years of family dinners where I'd sat quietly while Michael dominated conversations about business strategy and professional advancement. I thought about the career advice he'd offered that I'd never needed, the condescension I'd endured, the assumptions that had shaped his view of my life. But I also thought about the vulnerability I'd seen in his face that morning, the genuine remorse in his voice, the effort he was making to understand how he'd gotten our relationship so wrong. Change was possible, even between siblings who'd spent years misunderstanding each other. Sunday evening, I sent Patricia the updated integration timeline as promised, copying Michael on the email and including a note that he would be my primary liaison for all marketing-related transition activities. It was a small gesture of professional respect, but I knew he would understand its significance. Monday morning would bring new challenges as we figured out how to navigate the complex dynamics of family and business. But for the first time in years, I was optimistic that Michael and I might actually become allies instead of just relatives who shared the same last name. The weekend had changed everything between us. Now we had to prove that change could last when real work began. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a corporate calendar reminder. I stood outside the Chen Electronics building at 7:30, watching employees arrive for what they didn't yet know would be their first day under new ownership. The familiar rhythm of a workplace beginning its week felt different now that I was seeing it through the lens of integration planning rather than family obligation. Michael's BMW pulled into the parking lot precisely at 7:45, the same time he'd arrived every weekday for 13 years. Through the windshield, I could see him checking his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting his tie with the careful attention to detail that had always characterized his professional presentation. When he stepped out of the car, he moved with measured confidence, but I caught the slight hesitation when he spotted me waiting by the entrance. "Good morning, Director Chen," he said formally, extending his hand for a professional handshake. "Good morning, Michael," I replied, accepting the handshake while noting the careful way he'd chosen to address me. We discussed the importance of maintaining professional boundaries during business hours, but seeing him actually implement that distinction felt surreal. The lobby of Chen Electronics buzzed with the usual Monday morning energy, employees greeting each other over coffee and settling into their workstations. Several people glanced our way with curious expressions, clearly wondering who the woman in the business suit accompanying Michael might be. By noon, they would all know exactly who I was and what my presence meant for their futures. "The conference room is set up for the 9 o'clock meeting," Michael said as we walked toward the elevators. I took the liberty of preparing copies of our current marketing analytics and client relationship summaries. "That was thoughtful." "Thank you." The elevator ride to the executive floor passed in comfortable silence, both of us mentally preparing for what promised to be a complex day of introductions, explanations, and careful navigation of family dynamics in a professional setting. When the doors opened, Michael gestured for me to exit first, a small courtesy that felt significant in its acknowledgement of my authority. My parents were already in the conference room when we arrived, Dad reviewing financial documents, while Mom arranged a tray of pastries she'd brought from their favorite bakery. They both looked up when we entered, their expressions mixing parental pride with professional uncertainty. "Good morning, honey," Mom said, standing to embrace me before catching herself and extending her hand instead. "I mean, good morning, Director Chen." "Good morning, Mrs. Chen." I replied formally, though I squeezed her hand warmly to signal that affection hadn't been replaced by corporate protocol. Dad approached with the measured dignity he'd always brought to business meetings. But his eyes held a new respect that hadn't been there the previous week. "Sarah, I want to thank you again for the care you've taken with our employees during this transition." Reading through the integration plan over the weekend, it's clear that protecting jobs and maintaining company culture were primary considerations in your planning. Employee retention was a key factor in Meridian's decision to acquire Chen Electronics, I replied. Your team's expertise and dedication are significant assets that we want to preserve and develop. At exactly 9 o'clock, Patricia Wong arrived with two members of the integration team, a financial analyst named David Kim and an operations specialist named Jennifer Martinez. The meeting began with formal introductions and an overview of the transition timeline, but I could sense the underlying tension as my family adjusted to seeing me in a professional context they'd never witnessed before. The integration process will unfold over 90 days, I explained, displaying the timeline on the conference room's presentation screen. During the first 30 days, we'll focus on operational assessment and staff integration. Days 30 through 60 will involve system implementation and process optimization. The final 30 days will be dedicated to performance evaluation and long-term strategic planning. Jennifer Martinez addressed the group with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd managed dozens of similar transitions. Each department will be assigned an integration specialist who will work closely with existing management to ensure minimal disruption to daily operations. What about client relationships? Dad asked. Some of our major accounts have been with us for over 20 years. They'll want reassurance that service levels won't be affected. Client communication will be handled jointly by your existing account managers and our customer success team, Patricia replied. Michael, you'll be working directly with our regional client services director to develop personalized transition plans for your key accounts. Michael nodded, making notes on his tablet. I've prepared detailed profiles of our top 20 clients, including purchase history, service preferences, and relationship managers. I can have those ready for review by this afternoon. Excellent, Patricia said. That level of preparation will significantly streamline the client transition process. I watched Michael throughout the meeting, noting how naturally he fell into his role as a valuable team member, rather than the defensive family member I'd expected. His questions were insightful, his suggestions practical, and his obvious expertise in client relationship management was earning respect from the Meridian team. Sarah, Dad said during a brief break in the presentation, I have to ask about something that's been bothering me since Friday night. How long have you been planning this acquisition specifically? The Chen Electronics acquisition has been in development for 6 months, I replied honestly. But I want to be clear about something important. I didn't initiate this project because of family connections. Chen Electronics was identified as a target through our standard market analysis process. But surely having inside knowledge of our operations gave you advantages in structuring the deal. Actually, it created complications, I admitted. I had to recuse myself from certain aspects of the financial analysis to avoid conflicts of interest. The due diligence process was handled entirely by team members who had no personal connection to your company. Patricia nodded confirmingly. Sarah maintained strict ethical boundaries throughout the process. In fact, her personal connection to Chen Electronics initially made our board reluctant to pursue the acquisition. How did you overcome that reluctance? Mom asked. By demonstrating that the acquisition made financial sense, regardless of personal relationships, I explained. The numbers had to support the decision independent of any family considerations. Michael looked up from his notes. So you actually had to work harder to prove this was a good acquisition because we're your family? Significantly harder. The board required additional external validation and independent analysis before approving the project. That must have been frustrating, Dad said. Having your professional judgment questioned because of personal relationships. It was the right approach, I replied. Business decisions this significant should be made based on objective analysis, not personal feelings. The morning session concluded with departmental breakout meetings, giving each team the opportunity to meet their assigned integration specialists and begin the detailed work of merging operations. I found myself moving between groups, answering questions, clarifying expectations, and observing how my family members were adapting to their new roles within the larger Meridian structure. During lunch break, Mom approached me in the hallway outside the conference room. Sweetheart, can we talk privately for a few minutes? We found an empty office where she closed the door and turned to face me with the expression I remembered from childhood conversations about important topics. I need to apologize to you, she said without preamble. Not just for misunderstanding your career, but for failing to support you the way I should have as your mother. Mom, you've always supported me. I supported the daughter I thought you were, not the daughter you actually are. There's a difference. Her voice carried the weight of genuine regret. When you were trying to tell us about your promotions and achievements, I should have asked more questions, celebrated your successes, shown interest in your work. You were proud of me in your own way. I was proud of you for different accomplishments than the ones that actually mattered to you. I praised you for being independent and self-sufficient, but I never acknowledged that you were also brilliant and successful in building something remarkable. The admission touched something deep in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tender. It's okay, Mom. We're figuring it out now. Is it really okay, though? Have we damaged our relationship so badly that we can't repair it? I considered the question seriously. Our relationship isn't damaged beyond repair. But it needs to change. You and Dad need to start seeing me as an adult, whose choices and achievements deserve respect, not guidance. That's fair. What else do we need to change? Stop apologizing for my success, as if it's something that happened to me instead of something I worked for. Stop being surprised when I demonstrate competence. Start asking me about my life because you're interested, not because you're worried. She nodded, absorbing each point. Can you be patient with us while we learn how to do better? I can be patient as long as I see genuine effort to understand who I really am. You have that, she promised. Starting today. The afternoon brought individual meetings with key personnel, giving me the opportunity to assess how each team member was responding to the transition. The reactions ranged from cautious optimism to mild anxiety, but overall the staff seemed relieved to learn that their jobs were secure and their benefits would improve under Meridian's ownership. My meeting with Michael was scheduled for 4 o'clock, technically a routine integration session, but loaded with the complexity of our evolving relationship. He arrived precisely on time, carrying a portfolio of documents and wearing the focused expression he brought to important business meetings. I've prepared the client transition plans we discussed, he said, settling into the chair across from my temporary desk. Each major account has a customized approach based on their specific relationship history and service requirements. I reviewed the documents, impressed by the thoroughness of his analysis and the strategic thinking evident in his recommendations. This is excellent work, Michael. The level of detail here will make the client retention process much smoother. Thank you. I also wanted to discuss some ideas I had over the weekend about potential growth opportunities. I'm listening. He opened his tablet and displayed a presentation he'd clearly spent considerable time preparing. I've been thinking about what you said regarding industry-specific digital marketing. I reached out to contacts at some of the technical publications you mentioned, and I think we could establish thought leadership positions in 3 key areas. For the next 30 minutes, Michael walked me through a comprehensive marketing expansion strategy that demonstrated not only his understanding of the current client base, but his ability to think strategically about future growth. His proposals were well-researched, financially sound, and showed creative thinking about leveraging Meridian's broader resources. This is impressive, I said when he finished his presentation. You've identified opportunities that I hadn't fully considered during the acquisition analysis. Really? Really? Your understanding of the industry dynamics and customer relationships gives you insights that pure financial analysis might miss. He looked genuinely pleased by the recognition. I have to admit, approaching this as a strategic planning exercise rather than just relationship maintenance has been intellectually stimulating. Quote, good strategic thinking often comes from combining different types of expertise. Your client relationship knowledge and my analytical tools could be very effective together. Is that how you see this working? As a collaboration rather than a hierarchy? In terms of marketing strategy, absolutely. You bring expertise that I don't have, and I can provide analytical support that enhances your strategic planning. Even though you technically outrank me, organizational hierarchy and intellectual collaboration are different things, Michael. Smart leaders surround themselves with people who have expertise they lack. And you think I have expertise you lack? I know you do. You understand customer psychology and relationship dynamics in ways that financial analysis can't capture. That's valuable expertise that should inform our strategic decisions. The conversation continued for another hour, evolving from a formal integration meeting into a genuine strategic planning session. For the first time in our professional lives, we were functioning as colleagues who respected each other's contributions and built on each other's ideas. As the day concluded, the integration team gathered for a brief wrap-up meeting to assess the initial transition phase. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, with staff members expressing appreciation for the thoroughness of the planning process and the respect shown for existing company culture. The client communication strategy that Michael developed has already generated positive responses. Jennifer Martinez reported. 3 major accounts have expressed enthusiasm about the expanded services that will be available through Meridian's broader network. And the operational assessment indicates that most systems integration will be straightforward, David Kim added. The financial controls and inventory management systems are already compatible with our platforms. Patricia looked around the room with satisfaction. This has been one of the smoothest integration launches I've managed. The level of preparation and cooperation has been exceptional. As the meeting ended and team members gathered their materials, Michael approached me near the conference room door. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Are you proud of what we accomplished today? As a family, not just as business colleagues. The question surprised me with its vulnerability. Yes, I'm proud of how everyone handled today. You and Mom and Dad all demonstrated professionalism and adaptability that made this transition much easier than it could have been. I keep thinking about all the times I gave you advice about being more professional, more strategic, more business-minded. And today you got to see that I already was all of those things. Today I got to see that you were better at all of those things than I realized I could be. You were excellent today, Michael. Your client strategy presentations were genuinely impressive. Because I was finally working with your analytical tools instead of ignoring them. Because you were finally approaching strategic planning as a collaborative process instead of a competitive one. He nodded slowly. I think I'm beginning to understand what I've been missing all these years. What's that? The difference between being successful and being effective. I was successful within our existing framework, but you've been effective at creating new frameworks entirely. Success and effectiveness aren't mutually exclusive. Today proved that your success can be enhanced by effectiveness, just like effectiveness can be enhanced by your relationship-building success. So we're better together than either of us would be separately. I think so, yes. That's a new concept for me, he admitted. I've always thought about business success as individual achievement. Family businesses require different thinking. Individual success has to serve collective goals. Is that why you structured the acquisition to preserve everyone's positions? To serve collective goals rather than just Meridian's efficiency objectives? Partly. But also because I believe that preserving institutional knowledge and relationships creates better long-term value than short-term cost savings. Even when preserving those relationships means working with a brother who spent years underestimating you? Especially then. Family relationships are worth the extra effort required to make them work. Michael was quiet for a moment, then smiled. I'm glad you think we're worth the effort. I've always thought you were worth the effort, Michael. I just needed you to think I was worth the effort too. I do now, and I'm sorry it took so long for me to figure that out. 3 months later, the integration was complete, and the results exceeded even Patricia's optimistic projections. Client retention rates were 98%, employee satisfaction scores had improved, and revenue was tracking 15% above pre-acquisition levels. Michael had been promoted to Regional Marketing Director, a position that utilized his client relationship expertise while providing him with analytical resources that enhanced his strategic planning capabilities. The success of the Chen Electronics acquisition had earned recognition within Meridian's corporate structure, leading to my promotion to Senior Director of Strategic Acquisitions, with responsibility for the entire Western region. It was the kind of career advancement that I would have been excited to share with my family, and for the first time in years, I actually could. The celebration dinner took place at the same restaurant where the acquisition had been announced, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. My parents had invited the entire extended family to celebrate what Dad called the most successful business transition in Chen Electronics history. What I'm most proud of, Dad said during his dinner speech, isn't just the financial success of this acquisition, but the way our family learned to work together as true business partners. And the way we learned to see Sarah for who she really is, Mom added, raising her glass toward me. Our brilliant daughter who we should have been celebrating all along. Michael stood, his own glass raised. To my sister Sarah, who taught me that the best business strategies come from combining different types of expertise, and that the best family relationships come from actually listening to each other. To Sarah, the table echoed, and for the first time in my adult life the toast felt like genuine recognition rather than polite obligation. Later, as we were leaving the restaurant, Michael walked beside me toward the parking garage. "I have something to tell you," he said as we reached our cars. "What's that?" "Jessica and I are getting engaged next month and I want you to be my best woman." I stopped walking, surprised by the request. Best woman? I know it's not traditional, but I can't think of anyone who's been a better partner in helping me become the person I want to be. Michael, that's really meaningful. I'd be honored. There's one condition though. What's that? You have to promise to give a speech at the reception that tells everyone about all the times I was wrong about your career. I want the whole story told, including the part where I offered to get you an entry-level customer service job. I laughed, the kind of genuine laughter that comes from sharing absurdity with someone who understands its full context. You want me to publicly embarrass you at your own wedding? I want you to publicly celebrate the fact that I was lucky enough to have a sister who succeeded despite my complete failure to recognize her success. That's very sweet, but I think I'll focus the speech on how proud I am of the man you've become. Can you work in at least one reference to the fact that I spent 8 years giving career advice to someone who was already more successful than I was? I'll see what I can do. We embraced beside our cars, and I realized that somewhere during the past 3 months, my big brother had become my friend. Not just family by accident of birth, but someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, someone whose opinions I valued, someone who saw me clearly and appreciated what he saw. Driving home through the city that had become the backdrop for both my professional success and my personal growth, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that Friday night dinner when everything I'd worked for had finally been revealed. The acquisition had been successful beyond everyone's expectations, but more importantly, it had created the opportunity for my family to finally see me as I actually was, rather than as they'd assumed I must be. The woman who drove home that night was the same person who'd been sitting quietly through years of family dinners, listening to career advice she didn't need, and accepting condescension she didn't deserve. But now that woman was recognized, respected, and valued by the people whose opinions had always mattered most to her. It had taken 32 years and a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition, but my family had finally learned my name. Not Sarah the family disappointment, not Sarah who needed guidance, but Sarah who had been quietly changing the world while they weren't paying attention. And that recognition, more than any professional achievement or financial success, felt like coming home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.